What's going on, y'all? Joshua back at it again, and today I'm reviewing Black Myth Wukong. I had a great time with this game, guys. This game was phenomenal, but it wasn't perfect. I have a few nitpicks, and really they are nitpicks, but I have some nitpicks with the game that I thought would be interesting to talk about, right? For anybody who hasn't played yet, if you're one of the few, I guess, who haven't played it, so much of this game was fantastic, which I'll get into more in a little bit. But yeah, there's definitely a few things I feel like, in a sequel, which there's rumors to be one, I would like these things to be maybe addressed a little bit, right? But again, like I said, most of these are nitpicks. Overall, my experience with this game was so awesome. I love this game. But yeah, guys, how this will work is I typically give games two scores, right? One is, I call it my technical score, which I gotta find a better word for that. But my technical score being just like the actual technical aspects of the game, whether it's like the visuals of the game, right? The for something like this, like the timing of the combat, right? It could be the sound design, things of that nature, right? The other one is kind of my more subjective, just like, did I have fun? sort of score, basically, right? Just more so like, how much did I personally enjoy it? Did it work for me just personally, right? I do these two different scores because I think it's very apparent that everybody who plays games has types of games that we prefer and types of games that we don't prefer as much. And games that I tend to prefer, I'm probably going to have a higher, rating for those because I naturally favor them. So I think this kind of helps to distinguish what I think is kind of more like just objectively good and more so just purely subjectively, like how it worked for me and my enjoyment of it. That kind of average out the scores at the end, right? All right, with that, let me get into my general impressions of the game, right? And then from there, we're going to go into kind of like more in-depth stuff. So if you wanted to avoid maybe some spoilers, then, probably stick to this more general aspect or part at first. And then, check out the rest once you beat the game. All right. So firstly, let's talk about the story. The story in Black Myth Wukong is pretty bare bones. I would call it a little bit more akin to like a Souls-like game where they have a lot of lore, but there's not like a lot of story. And honestly, this is probably one of the most, I don't want to say disappointing, but I guess disappointing aspects of this game. The reason why I say that is because a lot of people compare this game to God of War 2018 / God of War Ragnarok. And if you've played those games, you know that the story in them is immaculate. They're amazing. They're super in depth. Was I expecting a story of that level? Not necessarily, but the fact that there's little to no story in this game definitely like kind of threw me off. Now let me be clear. There is story happening here. It's just not very much attached to your character or our character, who's referenced as the Destined One in the game, right? So as you play this game, you go through these different lands and you have some sort of goal that's not completely clear to you. You fight these bosses that will reference other characters whose names you probably don't have any reference for, or concept of who they might be referencing, and oftentimes you kind of just feel like how I think a lot of people who like playing Souls like games but aren't like the super hardcore people going into the lore, where you kind of just start up the game and you just kind of know like pretty much everything wants to kick my ass and I want to kick everything else's ass. They kind of go through the game with that mentality. That's at least for me in a lot of Souls like games. I know that there's story, but the story seems less important to our character. Like we have like a mission, like, hey, like Tarnish in like Elden Ring, right? Like, I don't know, become the Elden Lord, right? Or there's a couple other main things you can do. But for the most part, like you see all these other characters in those games that have histories that you can piece together if you're paying attention enough and if you are really trying to create that sort of web, that detective web of who knows who and who did what to who and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of how this feels a lot of the times. I will say that there's definitely some story highlights at the end of every chapter. They have these beautiful animations of stories that are kind of pertinent to that sort of chapter or zone, I guess you could say, as well as like the final boss. I think everyone is like, every animation at the end of each chapter is like directly tied to each final boss. But yeah, each one of them was beautiful. Each one of those animations. And I also say probably my favorite chapter was 4. There's effectively 5 like major chapters in this game. I think 4 for me maybe had like the most cohesive storytelling that I could follow, right? I had the most NPCs. I felt like I could actually like draw pretty clean lines between them, how they knew each other, all that sort of stuff, without having to feel like I needed to be a detective to figure it out. But yeah, so the story is pretty bare bones here. So if you're coming for a super in-depth story, you probably won't get it. If you came for just Chinese mythology and lore, you're gonna get a lot of that because there is a lot of story in the environment, so to speak, right? And the designs of the characters and the types of creatures and the bosses. I do believe that you could tell story through like design and all that sort of stuff. So in that sense, the story is amazing. But in terms of like the actual like plot and such, by the end of the game, I think I pretty much figured out like what we were trying to do. But it was one of those things where it was like a lot of the game I didn't really have a strong understanding of what I thought we were trying to do wasn't what we were trying to do. Maybe in the next game that's what we'll try to do. I don't know. But I do think that I would benefit greatly from replaying the game and just trying to see like will it make more sense the second time around, because some stories are like that. I think this one would be like that. Overall, the story seems a bit more cohesive in the second half. At first you start with this turnip headed guy that gives you some magic, and you kind of think that he's going to be like a reoccurring NPC, right? Like he's gonna maybe keep giving you different kinds of magic or guiding you, but then he kind of like disappears, and that's kind of an occurrence throughout the game. Like people that you think might be more reoccurring kind of end up disappearing, and you're like, oh, okay, like I guess they weren't that important. And in the first half, especially of the game, I would say like that's the case. So it's kind of hard to feel grounded to anything because pretty much any NPC you come across, you see them for a couple cutscenes. Maybe they say things that you really don't understand, and then before you know it, they're gone, right? And I think this game could have benefited from more recurring NPCs. In the second half of the game, there is one recurring NPC that I really liked. I really liked this character a lot. I think they also helped be a better storytelling device because they knew a lot of stuff about different characters and worlds and things like that. So it made it a lot more easy to follow, right? And I think that's what we really needed this whole game. I would have been fine if our protagonist, who doesn't talk or anything, if he just kind of didn't talk, but we had at least like one NPC throughout the whole game that kind of would give us extra information about things in context. I think that would have been a really, really effective way to help us understand what was going on with all of this, right? But that happens in like the second half of the game. Another thing when it comes to story is that eventually, partway through the game, there's like this hub area where a couple NPCs will gather, and I'll be honest, I thought these NPCs just weren't going to be that important, because a lot of them are pretty missable, actually. In fact, some of them are very missable, but some are kind of essential, I would say. But eventually you can unlock this sort of hub area where they all kind of gather, which I also believe is missable, like unlocking this hub area. So make sure to explore, which we'll get into that, the levels and stuff in a little bit. But yeah, so I think like just having like one recurring NPC throughout the whole game, and then also that sort of hub area, maybe unlocking it after the first chapter. So any NPCs you come across would be there, maybe give you more about this story, maybe having like, more missions associated with them so you can, get to know them a little bit better. I think that would help the game so much. But you don't really get that. But either way, the storytelling of the world in terms of like the designs of everyone was still very beautiful. The atmospheres, just like how some of the NPCs carry themselves, they definitely like you can kind of get a strong understanding of these NPCs very quickly. So that was still pretty cool. Probably another complaint about the story, I would say, is that clearly this game is steeped in Chinese mythology. That's what it's all about, right? The Monkey King, one of the biggest inspirations for things like Dragon Ball Z and so many other really, really cool shows, movies, books and other stories. I wish this game would have held our hand a little bit more, right? In terms of teaching us more about the mythology in general, right? I'm sure if you really pay attention, or if you start Googling names and things, you'll probably figure it out. But, this game did so well. It clearly captured our attention, right? It captivated us. And hopefully the developers in the next game realize that, oh, these people love this mythology in this world. Let's try to like really teach it to them. I'm not saying like make an educational game, right? Where you're quizzing us, but just taking more time to have NPCs like talk and like kind of have us grounded in like their experiences, their worlds, the different entities they're connected with and everything, and like what certain things mean would be really cool. kind of like how we know a lot about like Norse mythology, like a lot of people just kind of like on average, you know about like Thor, or you might know the term Ragnarok or what that means, or like, gods and giants, don't exactly get along in it. That sort of stuff, right? I had a hard time really figuring out like any of that. Like I know Yao Guais are a big thing. I didn't know exactly how to tell the difference between like a Yao Guai, maybe just some other entity, or what whatever the case was, or if Yao Guais are just kind of like demons in general. It was all kind of like hard to fully understand. Again, I think a reoccurring NPC that just kind of explained these things with us as we go through the game would have been very welcome, at least for me. Next up is the level design, and this is going to be a little bit uh shorter because, quite frankly, all the levels were awesome. There it is. That's my whole assessment. They're just awesome. Moving on. No. Each one was very unique. Each one, the word that comes to mind is biomes. Maybe because I played too much Returnal. But each biome or level was very distinct. They're very atmospheric. You can even see behind me, like this is the image of one of the levels, and just the mist and everything. The lighting was so immaculate on every single level. I really fell in love with each one. I will say that the levels definitely felt at first, like the first level felt very, very, very linear. And this is a linear game, like all the levels are. But after the first one, I felt that they actually opened up quite a bit, each of the levels, especially like 3 and 4 and 5 as well. Like especially like 3 and 4 for me. I was surprised at how like expansive they were. In fact, I was going through the second level, and because the first one was so linear, I just expected this one to be kind of the same, right? So I'm going through it, and I follow this path really far. I like to go down the wrong path first, meaning like not the main path that would progress the story, but the one with the the secret items and stuff like that. So I went down this path for quite some time, and I was like, I think this is the main path. Let me turn around and go see what was down that other path. Just to find out that like the path I was on at first, I walked it like 90%, like 99% of the way actually. And the boss was like literally like just like down a hallway basically, like the final boss. And then I go the other path to find out that the other path was just as long and just as expansive, many more stuff. So I could have almost bypassed just half the level on accident if I wasn't paying attention. You can always go back, which is nice. But I almost just went straight to the boss, and I would have only explored like 50% of the level. So these levels do open up quite a bit, which I really, really like. Maybe the first one is just kind of like a halfway tutorial level. You know what I mean? But yeah, they're pretty expansive. You will find a lot of stuff. I would suggest that you explore a lot. I went back to the first level after I had already been to like the third level, and I found like an NPC there that I was just like I just totally missed. Like it became kind of obvious like when I walked there like the second time, but the first time I just completely bypassed it. This game is like deceptively like immersive and deceptively deep. There's a lot of things hidden in different places that you would have never guessed. So definitely take your time exploring. I feel like I explored a lot of these areas pretty good. I'll still go back and find things that like a treasure chest that I just walked by. I'm like, wow, it was so obvious, but also not. Like you have to be paying attention, otherwise you're gonna miss a lot more than you probably realize. But ultimately, I think that's a plus. I think you want to have these levels that even if they aren't like crazy open world levels, you want something that's very, packed with like quality stuff, right? And like every single level pretty much has like a secret level to it. And some of these are pretty big actually. And if you don't like find your way stumbling into like a secret level at some point, just know you probably missed something, some major item or items, among other things, probably some bosses and other stuff. So yeah, the levels were amazing, guys. I have pretty much no complaints about them, except I was trying to do this review and I kept like the levels kept going. I'm like, dang, like I'm trying to hurry up and finish this so I can get a review out. But that ultimately it's a positive. The levels were fantastic, no complaints. All right, guys, let's talk about the combat. This is going to be a part where I go more in depth. I will at some point go into the menus of the game to show off some of this stuff, because this is one of those things where it was very interesting. And I think there are things that I personally didn't care for in the combat, but I don't think it was necessarily objectively bad. but maybe it was just kind of strange and, you know, kind of threw me off a little bit. And from what I've heard from other people talking about it, they kind of felt the same way. It was a very interesting sort of combat system. But with that, let's get into it. So first, I'm just going to kind of hit them, like all the points of combat in general, and then I'm going to go into the menus and all that and kind of show you guys. So if you want to avoid seeing too much and you want to, you know, experience it for yourself, you can do that. But the first thing I'll say about combat that was very interesting was the pacing. In a way, it was slow, but it wasn't. I don't want you guys to think that the game is like slow and boring. No, it was very dynamic, but a lot of the combos that the Destin one would have was very, very slow compared to other enemies, or at least when you're fighting a lot of enemies or a boss with like crazy techniques, right? Some like attacks would take a full like 2, almost 3 seconds, which doesn't sound maybe that long, but when you're in the midst of these combos, it feels very long, particularly because you can get knocked out of a lot of these attacks if an enemy hits you hard enough. So oftentimes, especially early in the game, it's very difficult to finish full combos because the enemy might be kind of staggered by the first couple hits, but they'll recover and they'll be able to hit you. So it was actually pretty kind of scary to try to finish like a full combo. It was very risky. Like if you started your combo at the wrong time, meaning that even if the enemy was just kind of standing there and they weren't attacking, if I start attacking and then they decide partway through my combo to, you know, decide to attack, they could hit me and do a lot of damage, right? Especially early on. Like this game can be pretty punishing at certain points early in the game. So you really feel the slowness of combat because of that. If you didn't take so much damage or if they didn't recover from the combos once you started them, at least like smaller enemies, then I don't think it'd be as noticeable. But since almost all enemies can kind of, you know, get out of that staggered state and hit you back, especially in the very last hit of the combo, which is like a solid like 2 to 3 seconds of just like an in-air sort of leap, then strike down, it's definitely leaves you open for an attack, especially if you're fighting multiple enemies. So I was definitely paranoid when trying to do this combo because there's only like one major combo in the game, technically like 2 kind of major combos. But doing like the main combo definitely was risky in the beginning, which, you know, just a smaller point, I think this game could have had a lot more going for it in terms of combos in the game. You effectively can just keep pressing square about 5 times and you can't mash it. Like, again, with the combat being so slow, it's like, you know, you hit square, like 1 or 2 seconds go by, hit square again, you do the second strike of your combat, another 1 or 2 seconds, to about 5 times total, right? But yeah, like the second combo is, you know, you hit square and then partway through that combo, you can hit triangle once you unlock a special sort of, you know, technique. And then, you know, you can do like a slightly different combo from that. But ultimately, those are really the only 2 combos. Not necessarily the only ways to attack, but those are effectively the only 2 combos. I definitely think they could have done a little bit more with that. I do like, you know, the way God of War does it with the R1 and R2, and then also having, you know, like the shield to like hit people or switching out weapons, which allows you to do different types of combos as well. I think there's a lot of different ways. Like even if you just kept it where it's just square and triangle, even having like different weapons that have different styles of fighting, which I know that, you know, the Monkey King famously has a staff, so maybe that wouldn't work as well. But you know, something to like switch it up. It does get a little stale after a while. You do get things to make combat more interesting again throughout the game, but I think just fundamentally the baseline, you know, gets pretty boring after a while. Another thing is dodging. Dodging is very, very interesting because the base dodge is very, very forgiving. And maybe that's meant to offset the whole like slow combos. In fact, it feels like it very much is for that. Like when you're in that combo and you gotta just like get out of dodge quickly, like your invincibility frames are very generous to, I guess, just kind of help balance that out. Maybe, you know, all the times you get hit from your slow combos, or just being able to get out of the combo and have enough frames of invincibility to, you know, to get to like a safe, you know, distance away or what, you know, what have you. But yeah, ultimately the dodges are very forgiving because it's really your only defensive maneuver. There are parries in the game eventually, and they aren't that great. Technically, it's not really like a counter attack. It's more like a counter, and then you can attack after. So you can do like a sort of a counter move that stops their attack, kind of stuns them, and then you can go into a combo from there. It's not incredibly powerful, but if you love parrying in other games, then you do have that option. But going back to dodging, you have a perfect dodge in this game. And the perfect dodge is weird, okay? I'm gonna have some footage going, but Normally in a lot of games to perfect dodge, you have to kind of like dodge right before like they attack or right before their attack's going to connect with you at least. In this game, it's this really weird, almost like this like sort of time warp thing. It feels like it's not literally, but it's like you have to dodge like as you're being attacked. I don't mean as the attack's coming in. I mean like when the attack has effectively pretty much connected with you, like in the middle of the connection of the attack. A second too late and you get hit, a second too early, and it's a normal dodge for the invincibility frames that are very forgiving. It was very weird. So much so that like I don't think I really started to understand it to like the second level. So it was very weird. You get used to it eventually, but again, it's like that whole slow aspect, delayed aspect of this sort of combat style, which again, it is cohesive. So once you kind of understand the pacing of this fighting style, of this combat system rather, you do start to understand it and you can use it very well. Like it wasn't like I just could not understand it the whole game. It was just very different pacing wise than pretty much any other game that I've kind of fought in, I would say. So ultimately, it does work. It's all cohesive, but ultimately it's a very strange pacing to it. Pretty much everybody that I hear talk about it says like the same thing. Another thing is that there's magic in this game. And the magic is interesting because you can, in a sense, combo it, but it doesn't feel like fluid combos, right? Especially with like your your base weapon attacks. It's kind of like you are like stopping to do something powerful, and then you kind of like it's like there's like a space in between everything. So you like stop, use a powerful spell, space, stop, do another powerful spell, space, do another powerful spell. If you want to do them back to back, just depending on how you have them configured, or do a powerful spell and then try to go into a combo. In a sense it flows, but also it kind of, I don't know, it's like you can feel like the stops in between a lot of it in a way that doesn't feel like a fluid combo truly. They are powerful. In fact, there's like times I could just take out, like, I'm not even the most optimized player who's playing this, but I could easily take out like a third, sometimes like half of a character's or of an enemy's life bar of like a full boss, right? Just from like comboing my magic, and just different abilities in the right way. So the magic can be overwhelming on like bosses. So if you do like want to have an easier time, I would say technically like the magic side of things is very, very powerful. So you can like overwhelm a lot of bosses like that and then dodge away quite a bit and then wait for things to recharge before using them again. There's quite a few missable like spells in this game. I would say at least like 5 for sure that I came across were completely missable, and there's not that many. I can understand like an open world like RPG where there's gonna be so many different weapons and abilities and such that missing some of them would be almost like a given. But since the game is a bit more linear, and there's not like a ton of abilities, I think I would like them to be more like baked into the game, like the story itself. So like maybe there's like a halfway point boss, like a main boss of every level, just like getting them at those points, I think would be a lot better than potentially missing them, like the parry ability. That was an optional boss by, all ways I can tell. During the second level, the parry ability was down one path that you could take to get to the final boss, but there's a completely other path you could take to get to the final boss. So you could just go through that level and just never get that ability. So there's a little hint for you guys. Slight spoiler, I guess. But yeah. So it's there's a lot of missable abilities that I think with this few, you should have just made them all, like essential to the story, like, or a part of the story rather. I do think overall, like, there could have been more variety in the staff combos and terms of like button input, as well as maybe making the spells a little bit weaker, but maybe more usable. You have like a mana bar that most of your spells use, then you have another sort of recharge for a different spell. You can like transform into different creatures that you fight throughout the game. And this just recharges, but other spells will use your mana. So if something costs 30 mana, it'll take that away from your mana bar. But there's not really a way to recharge your mana except for rest stops. Eventually, there is a way to do it with like consumables, but it's like very only one specific way. I think I would have liked it to be something more baked into like being able to consistently get your mana back. Because for the first half of the game or so, I was just like religiously trying to save my mana for like a boss. Because if you use it during just fighting random people, if there's not like a rest stop, before the boss, so you just have no mana, and that's like a pretty vital part at times to beating these bosses. So yeah, I think they should have made it where it's more available to get mana back earlier in the game. But the last thing I'll cover is actually in the game. I want to go through some of the level up menus and all that sort of stuff. So if you don't want any spoilers or like any sort of abilities or anything like that, this might be a good point to pause and then come back later to watch. But if you don't really mind, you want to get a good understanding of the skill tree and all that sort of stuff, I would implore you to stick around because it's pretty interesting. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time with this game because they might not understand kind of like what's worth investing into, right? So let's hop in. So here we are in the menu, guys. As you can see, there's a lot of tabs up top. These are all like the different like, skill trees that you essentially have available, or at least like the major categories. And then within them, you have smaller categories. Like here you have stamina, martial arts, and survival, which are all part of foundation. You also have staff stances, mysticism, alteration, strand, and transformations. I'm going to try to not rush this, but also hit this all pretty efficiently because there's a lot. So first thing, when it comes to non-magic, right, these are the two main tabs you have: foundation and staff stances. So basically just all your martial arts, all your staff things and things of that nature, dodging, all that. This game unfortunately has this sort of, I would say, this less than ideal approach to the skill tree, which is that imagine you're playing a game and you have like a baseline for what your character should be able to do, like the starting line. We'll call that 100%. That's like just the 100% like functional stuff. And then as you level up, your abilities get way stronger, and maybe by the end of the game you're like 200% or 300%, right? Because you just get exponentially stronger throughout the game, right? This game's approach feels like it's almost more like you start at like the 80% mark, you work your way up to 100% functional, then kind of end up being, maybe like 120, 130%, right? Those are kind of arbitrary numbers. But the point I'm trying to make is that things like stamina in this game are so vitally important, and certain combos, certain abilities, that it almost feels like you can't really fight well until you get very specific abilities, right? For example, I talked about how the combos are very slow, right? And because of that, you can get knocked out of your combos very easily, or you take a lot of damage from the combos. Well, there's an ability here that gives you damage reduction when you're doing the final attack. So that giant leap at the end just there, that took like 2, almost 3 seconds to resolve. There are so many times I got knocked out of that attack. But this being able to reduce that damage is actually pretty vital. So many bosses, so many enemies, so many groups of enemies will just wreck you if you don't have something like this, right? And this isn't the only ability. There's another one, right here. So you can hold triangle in this game to do like a really powerful heavy attack, right? And as you can see, that one took a little bit of time, but the more focus points you have, which are these dots to the left-hand side, whereas like 2, 3, and 4, the more focus points you have, the higher you go into the air and the longer that strike takes, which in a weird way is actually kind of detrimental, right? So having this to reduce the damage from that attack, especially from bosses, because some bosses feel like they almost specifically will strike you when you're like about to like go off on that attack. I don't think that's actually the case per se. I think it's just bad timing, but this is very, very necessary, right? This is one of those things that if the timing of these attacks weren't so slow, it would maybe feel more like a buff than like a requirement or a necessity to even be able to do them in the first place. And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that for the first, I'll say like 2 levels of the game, it was hard for me to ever really charge up my staff all the way up and to do these attacks without getting knocked out. And this made it a lot easier to do that. That ability that I had from the beginning that I couldn't really do because the attacks were too slow and enemies were too strong and they would knock me out of it. So it wasn't until later when I started to get these, different level ups that I felt like I was able to actually functionally do what the game wanted me to do in the first place. That's why I say it felt like I was at like 80% functionality and got to like 100% functionality. They eventually were like, our power felt like, okay, we're actually building on top of it, as opposed to just getting to what it should have been or what they wanted it to be. Another thing is that there's a lot of things you can't do without stamina. So it's very essential to like get this whole stamina section up. In fact, a very quick like method, if you haven't played yet, I would say stamina, all this stamina here, this left-hand side of martial arts, and these three leftmost categories are probably the most essential baseline stuff that you need to just make your combos flow better, to allow you to do things even when you run out of stamina, even if it's not as powerful. One of the most essential things is this right here. Dodging no longer interrupts light attack combos, right? Because effectively, you can press like square 5 times to do like a full combo, right? If I press it twice, I'm 2 strikes into the combo. If I dodge and then I start attacking again, normally I have to start my combo all over again, which again makes it very hard to do the thing that they want us to do, which is the full combo, right? They may not do it recklessly, but the whole point of why they gave us a 5-hit combo or 5-step combo is because they want us to get to that finisher, right? Without this, it's very, 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 very hard to do that. But being able to do this means that normally, right, if I go like 1, 2, right, and then I dodge, I'll have to start over 1, 2, right? But with this, I can go 1, 2, dodge, 3, 4, 5. I can finish it out. This is so essential to keeping your combos going in this game that it's pretty crazy actually. It's actually pretty nutty how essential some of this stuff is. All this stuff, I literally was like some of the last stuff I leveled up. Just later on in the game, I did a little bit of grinding for maybe like 2 or 3 hours. And these are all just stat boosts, just strictly stat boosts, more health, critical hit chance, more defense, more mana, all that sort of stuff. Truthfully, none of this is like spoilers because you can see all this from the beginning. This right here is that you can like spin your staff to deflect things. I never use this in the game, guys. I just never did. Staff stances, right? Smash stance is the most universally useful one. This lets you charge your staff while running. Again, it's essential. You need this because otherwise you have to wait for the enemy to try to get closer and, you know, maybe, you know, unleash it at the right time. It's just difficult to time. Having it where you can charge it while running, you can try to like, you know, run away from them or closer when you're ready to hit them. It's very essential. But smash stance is the most universally useful one. Pillar stance and thrust stance are cool. I never really used them. I think if you want to, go for it. I don't think any of this stuff is useless, but there's definitely things in this game where it's like, some stuff is better than others as a baseline, meaning they're more universally useful. And these 3 categories are that under staff stances. That being said, you can at any point go to a rest stop and just completely respec, which I love. That, I don't know why more RPGs don't just have that in there. It's one of the most amazing things you can give anybody in an RPG, just a free respec. That's what I don't like about Elden Ring, is that it costs like a, you know, a resource to use it. And you have to go to a specific NPC. They just add these extra steps. In this, any rest stop you can respec. So experiment, try things out. You might love pillar stance. You might love thrust stance. I like smash stance because universally throughout the whole game, no matter the enemy, I could use this and it was effective. Going off of the spells, a lot of these are missable. Spellbinder, many of the transformations, which are not shown here, are missable. But yeah, effectively, these spells, Immobilize will literally immobilize your enemy. Ring of Fire will give you buffs inside of it. Spellbinder stops you from using any magic or really any sort of items that might be somewhat magical outside, like, you know, healing items and such. But it makes you like a lot stronger offensively. I use this a lot when I was just going to like the main world, just so that like I could kill enemies faster. Because again, I didn't like spending my mana anyways out there, so I just use this buff to make myself stronger when fighting enemies, basic enemies. One thing about spells that I feel like they could have changed is the fact that they are kind of locked to where they can be put. So here you see I have 3 hexagons on this right hand side here. Well, there's 4 hexagons, but there's smaller hexagons next to each one. So in the mysticism category, which is the leftmost button, it's the square button, R2 and square. I have 3. Up top, I have 2 hexagons above the triangle option. I have 6 to the right of the circle one, and I just have 1 at the bottom. Unfortunately, right, I cannot take my other mysticism spells and put them other places, right? So in Mysticism, I have Immobilize, Ring of Fire, and Spellbinder. If I equip Ring of Fire or Spellbinder, they will always be in this leftmost category, right? Which kind of sucks because there are some spells that you would maybe want to try out different combinations with. Like maybe having Cloud Step and Rock Solid, the kind of get out of dodge sort of spell. So you're like invisible, they attack your clone. Or the parry one, right? Some people might want to have both. You know what I mean? But you could only have one of them equipped at a time. I think being able to freely equip, which spells you wanted where would add so much versatility to this game and would maybe, even allow for more combos, right? So that it's a kind of a small gripe. But ultimately, I think that's something a lot of people would be interested in. Guys, there's a lot of customization in the items. Not too much, but there's definitely different armor sets. I have some earlier armor sets on now to not be as spoilery. But yeah, ultimately, there's a decent amount of customization in the equipment. Not crazy amounts. I do like that a lot of the armor sets will have different buffs for you if you want to get like a certain sort of playing style. Some of the armor sets have pretty cool abilities, and they all look dope. Like they all look really, really sick. You have these sort of like accessories they can equip as well, right here. Bonus sort of items that can give you different, abilities like fire immunity upon activation, or another way to transform temporarily to become like an enemy you've defeated. There's a lot of little cool stuff here. Not too much to go over here. I think all this stuff was pretty much fine. Crafting different weapons and all that. No complaints. I think they could go more in depth with the DLCs, but yeah, no complaints here. Ultimately, guys, that covers pretty much everything of the more in-depth part. Ultimately, there is more stuff, but I think like this is the most vital stuff, right? I think a lot of people are having trouble with this game because they just didn't quite understand like how much of a disadvantage they were at or how vital some of these abilities are without really knowing it, because a lot of this stuff goes a very long ways. And it's just kind of a shame that a lot of people are struggling, because I think they just might not understand how effective some of these little things are to getting you to full effectiveness. You know what I mean? But yeah, with that, that's pretty much the deep dive aspect of this. So that's the in-depth section of Black Myth Wukong, guys. I hope you liked that, and I hope you got some insight into the systems of this game, how it works, maybe some traps to not fall into, or at least some better understanding so that when you play, you can just kind of understand like how certain things work a lot better. But with that, let's get into the scoring of this game. On a technical level, guys, for my technical score, I think I would give this game, I'll say like a very light 9 to like a very solid 8. The reason why I say that is because even though I have a lot of nitpicks with this sort of system, it does work well with itself. The combat system specifically. It is like a system that once you decide to learn it and like, try to abandon your other game knowledge or game sense and try to just immerse with this one, you definitely can learn it. It's just not very natural. Something about it wasn't nearly as intuitive as a lot of other combat systems that I've played over the years in various types of games. So it wasn't very intuitive. I think for a lot of people, it's been very challenging to kind of get the grips of it. And I think it makes it pretty challenging, but ultimately, I think it is still a very cohesive system. And when you understand the system as they wanted it to be used, I think you can use it quite well. But I do think that it could have been more intuitive for sure. There's balancing things I think need to be worked on in terms of like spells and maybe the speed of combat. Things like the parries felt very awkward to me. But ultimately, I don't think I can say that any of this stuff was bad, right? I think it was all very, very solid. I think it works as a system. I think it works for this game, but it wasn't ultimately super satisfying, I guess. The world design, amazing. No complaints. I loved it. Characters design, sound design. I didn't even talk about the music, which is, fantastic. But so much that was so amazing. Really, the weakest part is the story. To me, so much potential with it, and they just ultimately it was pretty bare bones, I would say. There's definitely some highlights, there's definitely lore and stuff there, but ultimately I feel like sometimes you're kind of playing and you don't really know why or what's going on, or certain moments, especially between chapters, can be pretty jarring. At the end of one chapter, we're like all good, and like the start of another one, we're like almost dying. I'm like, well, wait, what happened? So stuff like that just throughout the whole game, where I feel like they don't really take you through the story. Um, you're just like almost like another character in the world, and like the world has a story, and you're just kind of walking through it, right? So the story is probably the weakest part. I think that's why I'm probably going to give it more like a solid 8 rather than a light 9. Out of everything, I think between like all the nitpicks of combat and the story, detriments, I don't think I could give it a full like like solid 9, but it's up there. I'll give it like maybe like an 8.8 or something. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'll give it about like a solid like 8, a very very solid 8, a high 8, for the technical side of things. When it came to like my personal fun with this, I'll probably give it like a soft 8. I really enjoyed it, and that's not bad. Anything that's a 7 or higher, guys, I would recommend. Right, a 7 out of 10 game for me is a game that had a lot of fun stuff, a lot of cool stuff going on in it. Yeah, some flaws, but at its core was a fun game, an experience I do not regret. So, giving it a soft 8 for me is just, I'm a big story guy. I would have loved to have been even more immersed in the story, but they really leave you hanging on that. The combat, maybe it's the expectations I went in with, when people were kind of comparing it to certain games, and I can see why they did, but ultimately, I think like you probably do it a disservice by comparing it to a Souls-like game or to like the new God of War games. I can see aspects as to why, but ultimately it's just kind of its own game, in my opinion. But no, ultimately I think it was the lack of story, this sort of weird combat system that kind of felt dull at times. There was definitely times where my brain shut off a little bit, and I wanted to keep exploring because I didn't want to miss stuff, but I also didn't really want to fight enemies. I kind of just wanted to, go past them, but it was also like, well, I might as well just kill them because it'll be easy. I'll get experience for it. But there are definitely times when my brain kind of shut off. But the boss fights were amazing. It was never really during the boss fights that this happened. But yeah, in between that, in between the boss fights, definitely sometimes like combat got a little dull for me. But overall, guys, for me, I say it was about like a soft 8, for just personal fun. I would still highly recommend it because clearly this game is amazing. It was made with a lot of love. It's visually stunning. Sound design's amazing. But with all that said, guys, rounding those numbers together or averaging them out, this game for me falls at about an 8.5. Very solid, but also room for improvement. I would love to see them do quality of life stuff in the DLCs, or even the sequel. I think there's a lot of like room for them to grow and to just do even more amazing stuff. I'm looking forward to future boss fights and all that sort of stuff. But guys, I had a great time with this game. I think you will too. Feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you found this useful. If you feel like you got some useful information out of it to help you as you do your Black Myth Wukong journey. And I hope you guys have a great time because I did. With that, guys, take care. I'll see you next time. Peace.